Thank you for joining us today for ClearDATA's webinar, Speed to Market, Compliance, and the Competition in the Life Sciences. Today we have two thought leaders joining us as your hosts to explore the challenges and promises happening in life sciences today. Matt Ferrari is CTO of ClearDATA and Scott White is ClearDATA's Chief Strategy Officer. Matt has been one of the most influential leaders in cloud computing since his earliest days in the industry, starting at Hosting.com, where he built the company's award-winning public cloud platform. He joined ClearDATA in 2014 and has been integral to the company's rapid growth and success of its multi-cloud privacy, security, and compliance offerings. Scott is a veteran health and life sciences leader. Scott drives the innovation, growth, and strategic relationships at ClearDATA. Prior to ClearDATA, as a management consulting executive, Scott led change in pharma, payer, and provider organizations. He's also served as the VP of IT at the nation's fifth largest provider system, where he oversaw over $500 million in clinical systems budget for over 40 hospitals. And with that, I will turn it over to today's hosts.
Thanks, Emily. And Matt, I'm looking forward to today's conversation. And in fact, it's interesting, we're talking about life sciences, and I'm in Boston as we speak, one of our country's life sciences hubs. And today we'll talk about life sciences and medical device industry. And of course, Matt, you and I speak with leaders in this space regularly, and we serve many of these leaders since they are our customers. So I think it will be interesting and it'd be helpful to share what you and I have heard, with the addition of some of our own insights given our focus on the secure and compliant cloud. So today we'll talk about the market and the pressures for speed and innovation, the potential of the cloud to address those pressures and the challenges of the cloud and some solutions. And we'll wrap up with, I think, some compelling customer examples. So Matt, do you have any other initial thoughts as we get started?
Absolutely. So really excited to have this conversation today and always excited to speak with you, Scott. I find myself today in humid Austin and at our corporate headquarters, and also really excited to talk about some of the challenges that specific organizations are facing as they take the kind of the rising challenge of GDPR and HIPAA. We know that that's a really easy thing to say, but very hard thing to execute on, specifically because we're going to talk today around regulation challenges and changes. We're going to talk about changes in automation and public cloud technology. And we're seeing a lot of life sciences organizations actually lead the way in this. So really excited to talk about that today.
Excellent. Good. Well, yeah, let's go ahead and start. I think very importantly for context, let's set the foundation for this discussion and look at the business model and operational and clinical issues and IT trends, and then we'll dig in some more to what's happening in the industry and weave in then how can technology and cloud address those issues. So I think we've seen it's in the news, huge pressure from a business model perspective on all of healthcare. Healthcare is consuming almost 20% of our U.S. GDP. So there's pressure on demonstrating clinical outcomes and paying the minimal amount for those outcomes. And hence this move toward a value-based care reimbursement, and that's affecting all elements of the industry. Certainly payers are under that pressure, providers are, and then key organizations like the pharma, life science, and medical device players are having to work within new value-based reimbursement pressure. That can oftentimes lead to consolidation. We have other price pressure from generics, given the cost of drug development, where we see more global distribution of those things. And then I think also importantly and interesting, we have this move to externalization and collaboration. And as therapies become more complex and specialized, we're finding organizations that we serve are bringing in partners to help them and focus on niche elements throughout the whole life cycle of drug discovery development and ultimately the commercial growth and, of those therapies. So that's an important context for us to consider. From an operational perspective, again, I do lead with the cost reduction, and then also this pressure on developing targeted therapies and customized devices and personalized medicine. That's what consumers or patients are becoming more used to. The providers and physicians who prescribe these therapies are more used to tailored applications. And as we start fighting specific and more niche diseases, that folds into this issue of more specific and targeted therapies. Continued regulatory demands, GDPR is just one example. We see more engagement with providers and patients, and they want to be a part of the process, and we're seeing life sciences and medical device companies absolutely press on how to appropriately, from a regulatory and clinical perspective, engage with patients and engage with providers so that they can get the best outcome. And then to the technology underlying all of this requires vast amounts of more data, again, from the very earliest stages of drug discovery through this end of the life cycle of real-world evidence and engaging patients who are using therapies and understanding specifically their outcomes, their potential complications, ideally the benefits that they're seeing from those drugs, and then what are the sources of this data that we're gathering? Well, some of these sources are new. Hospital electronic medical records and clinic EMRs, health information exchanges. We have wearable devices like smart watches and things like that, and home monitoring sensors that are gathering data in volumes that we had never seen, varieties that we've never seen, in a velocity that we've never seen before. And all of this, we're still trying to squeeze out cost, even though we're delivering this vast amount of IT innovation. So those are some things that I've seen, Matt. How about you?
Yeah, so I love that you end with cost reduction, because that's something that's on my mind constantly when I talk to life sciences organizations. And as you think about opportunity as it relates to public cloud, opportunity isn't just around scale; it's around optimization. You know, public cloud organizations are consistently introducing new features and technologies into the market that allow life science organizations to really adopt things like technologies that don't make them pay for software licensing except at time of use, or pay for code that's running when maybe the life sciences organization isn't running some of these kind of heavy demand models that are out there. If you think about some of the IT trends that you mentioned, you know, I think a lot about ML and big data, and ultimately how do you normalize or share the data across a life sciences organization, or even integrate it in an interoperable fashion into other medical systems. And so cloud is a real enabler there that's, you know, driving a lot of both the innovation, but as you think about scale and elasticity, it's also driving a lot of the cost optimization. And so that would be kind of what I would add on there. But, you know, I know, Scott, that we also wanted to talk about what you're seeing going on in the current market. So you want to take that away?
Absolutely. And yeah, we'll kind of put a finer point on some of these items, actually put some numbers to it. I think many of us are familiar with the pressure to get therapies to market much more quickly. It's taking 10 years on average for a new medicine to complete this journey from the early stages of discovery to get to the marketplace. So you think about from discovery and development, and of course all of the approvals and manufacturing and then commercial adoption. It's a long cycle, very expensive cycle, $2.6 billion. And you know, much of that time is sewn up with concern about patient safety and the efficacy of the drug. And so you see 6 to 7 years of clinical trial work. So, you know, there's this, I think, great examples of the pressure that we're facing as an industry to get therapies out to market, ultimately really to make a difference in patients' lives and to give new tools to caregivers and physicians and nurses and those who are treating patients.
You know, as I think about these numbers here on the slide, I think about all of the obstacles that a organization in the life sciences space runs into. And, you know, as I think about some of that math, the first one that I really wanted to talk about was internal data centers and kind of that on-premise model. And you think about healthcare organizations and life science organizations that are trying to adopt things like big data or launching a data lake. But one of their challenges almost instantly is going to be, how do I get that deployed and how do I do it fast? I have all of my CapEx or my capital expenditure equipment living inside of facilities and data centers. I have to either find capacity for that all the way from your power and transformers down to your compute and storage, etc. But I also have to probably fill out all kinds of different asset requisitions. I have to go through process approvals. I probably have to follow, you know, every check mark in a ITIL book that's needed in order to deploy. But that is slowing it down and driving up a lot of those metrics that Scott just went over. In addition, you know, I think about some of the other things on this slide around the data sources specifically and siloed data, where life science organizations have to go capture data from different data sources across different types of databases. You know, you think about, you know, your SQL and your Oracle and your unstructured data that may live in a flat file, as an example. And these are real things that life science organizations oftentimes bring to me to figure out, okay, how can we normalize those things? And one of the things that I'd love to, you know, talk with you about, Scott, is a lot of times, you know, you have all of these technologies that are released by the public cloud providers to go do all this, to do things like de-identification and normalization, and you know, in the case of data silos, even the ability to convert all of this clinical data from one format to another format and merge it. But then oftentimes the challenge is completely different. You know, did you have some thoughts there?
I see these challenges that are technical, as you've highlighted, and I think it's important, and I think this would really be the focus of our discussion today. But I think we really need to acknowledge that there are very significant biological mechanisms, for instance, that are unknown, biomarkers for diseases that have not yet been discovered. We've seen even the promise of sequencing the genome. Many have suggested that it's been far more complex in terms of harnessing the value and actually delivering the volume of therapies and results and cures that we expected from that. We see political or institutional challenges of relying upon accuracy of public data, impediments to collaboration amongst academia and industry and government. So I mean, there's a lot going on that is delaying speed to market. So I think we keep those things in mind, even though we kind of are going to dive back in, I think, appropriately to this technology side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, as I think about some of the advantages, kind of on the flip side, that organizations in life sciences can see and feel that the cloud can actually provide. The first one clearly is speed and time to market. We know that public cloud has, what they will say is almost infinite capacity from a processing perspective, which is important in life sciences as you're running through lots of kind of those clinical things, from de-identification and anonymization, or maybe you're just you're building and trying to tear down those silos. And so you have the ability to really almost provision real-time assets that we can appropriately tag if you use public cloud correctly, so that you can identify specifically where that sensitive data or PII lives and how it flows, or even if it is unstructured data. you obviously have the deep advantage of automation. Virtually every, not only public cloud provider, but every life science organization that I have the privilege of working with is really steeped in how do they take advantage of native cloud as well as third-party automation, and there's deep advantages there. You know, one of the advantages is around consistency, right? How do I make sure that when I provision a asset from the beginning of the service availability till the end, it's obviously very important that when you're running something like a clinical trial, that asset remains consistent throughout the lifespan of that clinical trial. And so those kind of automation things become very, very important. And then, of course, the ability to scale up and down. Some of the really cool life science projects that we've had the ability to work on, you know, have deep burstability where they're running some kind of clinical trial or a de-identification exercise, and they need amazing burstability. So they need to be able to spin up big data workloads or Hadoop-like workloads almost on demand, and then spin them down to not only reduce cost, but simplify the security and compliance model and potential, you know, vector that a bad guy could have inside the environment. And then I would say, finally, availability. I think everybody knows that public cloud organizations offer amazing availability, some of them into the, you know, the 7 nines at this point for certain services. And that provides the life science organization, you know, kind of that reliability model without having to waste, to Scott's earlier slide about cost, waste additional cost on things like over redundancy or excessive spending just to make sure that you have kind of an N+1 model. And so that has been some of the kind of the deep advantages that I've seen. Scott, how about on your side?
Well, yeah, you mentioned this modernized clinical trials. I'll just put a plug in here later. One of our examples is actually related to an IRB example for human subjects, and we'll talk about some of those issues. So yeah, it's good.
Excellent. So, you know, the other piece that we talked a little bit about earlier, but has become an enormous part of how to adopt public cloud in the life sciences space is really compliance. And we mentioned kind of rising to that challenge, whether it's, you know, HIPAA, GDPR, or even other standards that are out there. And what I've seen is that what you want to attack it from taking a look at your compliance framework first. This way you understand how specifically to map the compliance framework that you have to services that you can consume. That allows you to really increase your velocity once you actually get started with development, or let's say ingestion of this sensitive data for you know, normalization as an example. It also allows you to start to understand how those underlying services work from a compliance perspective, because it is extremely real, and everyone should be aware that just because a regulation is released in the wild or exists in the wild, some of these regs, one, existed before public cloud was even around and didn't take that into consideration, and two, other ones, as they evolve, those services evolve as well, right? You know, public cloud services are constantly changing with new features, and of course, everyone knows one of the major first check the box is around encryption, whether it's in transit or at rest, and how do you encrypt your data, and how do you encrypt all of the third-party ancillary apps that it takes to run your life sciences development. And so these standards are in place, but on the public cloud side, you need to always be thinking about how do those things actually occur, and when there's changes, are my environments remaining compliant again throughout the life cycle of that life sciences use case. And so you really kind of want to, I would say, focus on how can you get third-party help so that you can really focus on innovating on the life sciences side of your application. And there's lots of experts out there, folks that do things like third-party high-trust assessments, and they do HIPAA readiness kind of, security risk assessment type things. And you can get that specific for your, even all the way down to your app level by using third-party tooling like vulnerability scanning tooling, some native cloud tooling that allow you to get the help that you need. But what I would tell you is that it is a moving target. And so you have to make sure that you are prepared from a vendor, a partner, or an internal perspective to be ready to handle those ongoing changes, because they're going to come at you from the public cloud side, they're going to come at you from the regulatory side, and so you really need to understand kind of the T's and the I's in all of your agreements, and also on the technology side. Scott, did you have any color to add there?
Yeah, this has been interesting. I've been working over many years with, for instance, as a hospital CIO or enterprise VP, working with chief medical officers or others who are trying to drive innovation for their hospital, their region of hospitals. They would get so frustrated by what they saw as barriers of, the compliance team is preventing me from doing this. The CISO won't let me do that. And they really saw oftentimes folks get frustrated and see compliance as a barrier to innovation and a barrier to speed. And of course it can be, but I think compliance done well can actually be a big benefit. We see in one of those earlier slides we shared the importance as drug discovery, development, manufacturing, and commercialization is requiring more and more collaboration. Well, in order to collaborate, you need trust, and security and privacy and compliance is a great advantage, a great supporter of improving that degree of trust. If you've got legal agreements and the technical ability to execute, and you've got proof of your security, and you've got evidence, then you're going to work together better with your partners, and you can kind of get those things out of the way and get to the point of discovering drugs and developing, manufacturing them, and then delivering them to patients. So I think it doesn't have to be an either or. We need to be compliant or fast, or compliant or innovative, but it really should be a both and. Done right, they can complement each other. I think it's an important part that actually we at ClearData like to be a part of.
That's really well said. As I think about that, I think oftentimes around kind of a Proveit model. And when I have had the privilege of sitting in a room with, a chief security officer or chief information officer that is focused on kind of that security and compliance model, and help me learn to trust cloud as I think about GXP, or as I think about other life sciences, data workloads. The real trick has been, how do you actually prove that these things remain secure, these things remain compliant? And so I would tell you that certainly the way that we've done it is just by showing evidence in our world, from a portal perspective, but real evidence of how these services remain compliant over time, so that they can be downloaded, they can be accessed, they can be imported from a log perspective into a life sciences security and event management console, as an example, but also they can be shown at time of audit from a third-party perspective. And so that's kind of with the way we've built trust, to Scott's point, so that we can help the security and compliance organizations really get behind the public cloud and allow that speed to market to really happen, rather than be an inhibitor. As I think about the advantage itself, we haven't really talked about the business associate agreement, but from a business associates agreement perspective, we know kind of that commitment of how to safeguard sensitive data. Hopefully, as you think about your BAAs inside of your organization, you're thinking about how to negotiate them and how to make them comprehensive. And what I mean by that is who has accountability based off of the BAA for certain activities or protecting your data. How do incidents get reported if there was to be an event? And of course, by comprehensive, always be thinking about all of the different services and technologies and even partners that either process, store, or transmit sensitive data, whether it's PII, PHI, et cetera. And the reason why is because those are the folks that have access to your data, and there could potentially be a challenge, if there's some kind of incident. So you want to make sure that those have been properly negotiated and that your partner or vendor truly has helped you vet those. One of the other things advantages that you can get by working with an expert is, again, around automation. It says DevOps here on the slide, and certainly there's lots of things we could talk about with DevOps that would take a lot longer than 45 minutes, from microservices to containers to all kinds of buzzwords I could talk about forever. But the truth is, be thinking about working with partners that really understand not only the life science use cases that Scott's about to walk through, but also how do I really translate those into technology that really focuses on solving some of the problems that Scott was mentioning up front, whether it be kind of some of that cost savings or whether it really being able to grow your regulatory workloads on demand, but really be thinking about that. And DevOps automation allows you to do that, again, in a consistent manner so that you're provisioning the same way every time, tearing it down the same way every time, patching it the same way every time, but also doing it using more native cloud technology and modern cloud technology so that you can continue to reduce costs and also reduce your security and compliance risk profile. From a ClearData perspective, one of our key advantages is that we have a product called Comply, and that product allows organizations both in the healthcare and life sciences space to use what we call automated safeguards, or the ability to go out, use cloud native services, go out either into your life science public cloud account or a public cloud account that is under our BAA and our umbrella, do discovery of what is in or out of compliance across over 100 different public cloud services, and have automated remediation so that at the time of any kind of change that would take you out of compliance, from a process perspective, it does a discovery almost instantly of what fell out of compliance, automatically remediates it, logs it so that from a logging and from a compliance perspective, you can show an audit trail that you absolutely took the right action to get this fixed and back into compliance, and then notifies you, the life sciences organization. The reason why that's important, I think everybody understands, but really helping drive rigor through change management, which is a massive challenge that we've done other webinars and events on. Change management in a life sciences organization typically isn't the regulation or the cloud feature, which we talked about earlier. It's typically the human beings or the application that are making changes, probably in a proper change window, we hope, but it's having a negative impact on the state of compliance. You think about your developers. I think about my developers. My developers probably know their software and their technology to a T. They probably know 10 languages in some cases. But do they know how every line of code impacts the state of compliance or the state of vulnerability that they could be opening themselves up to? And the answer is no. How could they? They're not compliance experts. They're software developers. And so we really kind of think about that at ClearData, and we've built behind that a compliance dashboard which shows red, yellow, green, how compliant am I, either by type of life science workload or by individual asset, so that you can appropriately tag an asset to a department and see how compliant am I, even with a trend line showing me, am I driving the right direction on a state of compliance? Because you're going to hear, of course, from other people that compliance is a journey, right? It's always evolving and changing, and 100% can oftentimes be known as a myth. And then I think the last thing on the kind of the security, compliance, privacy side that I'd love to mention here is that we have the privilege of working with a lot of really great organizations across multiple segments, as you guys can see on the screen. It really kind of from the small to enterprise life science and healthcare organizations across, the payer, the pharmaceutical life science, the provider market, and we're all backed by high trust. And I'm sure everyone knows what high trust is, but just in case you don't, high trust is kind of that certification that a lot of healthcare and life science organizations have been going through. ClearData has been fortunate enough to have been certified since 2014, recertifying every other year, sometimes even more frequent as we bring new services and new public clouds into the high trust domain. But picture the ability to take multiple different regulations and guidance and really kind of build process and procedure around it from a more prescriptive perspective, so that there's more rigor on the way from a people, process, and product perspective, security and compliance is run. And so that's a lot of the kind of advantages that working with a partner like ClearData would bring. I would love to, of course, really get into the use cases next. So Scott, do you want to start walking us through some of the use cases out there?
Yes, absolutely. No, it's exciting to take the concepts that we've been talking about, and then let's talk about some very specific stories, examples of these concepts in practice with our customers. And so we have 4 use cases. The first one is really a great story about a pharma organization doing well by doing good. And in this case, there's a pharma innovation division that was working with hospitals, implementing a software solution that would not just help their antibiotics so that they developed and sell, but that would be good for all antibiotics and as a result for all of the patients within the hospital. So on the other hand, though, hospitals have been very cautious about moving their data to the public cloud. There's also, some caution about how we're going to be partnering and collaborating with a pharmaceutical organization. So this topic of security, privacy, and compliance was absolutely top of mind in this project, and we're very thankful to have stepped up. They've had this highly advanced analytical solution, which included some machine learning, artificial intelligence, which, however, needed to take advantage of the power of the public cloud, which Matt described in that prior slide. It also involves, since you're in the hospital, not just 1 or 2 points of integration, but multiple points of integration with hospital systems in order to gather vast amounts of data and understand which antibiotics were appropriate to do things like detect sepsis far earlier, very complex condition with multiple markers, not just a single one, and then to see that appropriate, ideally narrow antibiotic was prescribed and that full course of the antibiotic was taken so that we don't end up with more drug-resistant bugs. So really exciting example of how to put this together. And I know, Matt, you've probably seen some of the specific integration challenges with this type of solution.
Yes, absolutely, Scott. As I think about some of the challenges specifically around HL7, which everybody, of course, knows is, health level 7, and really how do we provide security and compliance rigor around that data, oftentimes not properly labeled, not properly structured, and always, the challenge around how to deliver those things in an interoperable way across multiple systems and multiple devices. And so that's an enormous challenge, and how do you do that at rapid scale? And so I think you absolutely nailed that one. As you think through some of the other challenges, I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about the devices themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Matt, this next example, really exciting. So there were some academic researchers at a leading academic medical center, worldwide reputation. These neuroscience specialists had used some inexpensive but very powerful AWS tools to develop an app that monitored the touch sensitivity of someone's hand and was able to monitor the progression of this neurologic disease. And it was very exciting. I wanted to deploy this at their institution. and they just didn't have all of the security, privacy, and compliance that was needed for an institution like this. So we worked with them and developed the technical controls, and also very importantly, things like the legal frameworks, as Matt, you talked about the business associate agreement and the protections of, from a liability perspective, et cetera, that put the compliance people and attorneys at the institution at ease, so that they were able to release this powerful clinical tool. It was so good, in fact, that the pharma organization partnered and rolled that out to multiple other academic institutions within the United States, and then later throughout Europe. And we were able to be a part of that. And not only have we focused on developing compliance for HIPAA, for instance, here in the United States, but have rolled out to many other countries across Europe and Canada and Asia, and have had 30 different data locality projects where we look into the nuances of how do you have a secure cloud and fully conform with the specific privacy and security and healthcare regulations of a specific country. So really exciting, and this was a great project. We were able to do that. And clinically, it's wonderful in that this tool at this first institution, it is now used in every clinic visit for every patient with this condition. So really a wonderful diagnostic and successful tool. Matt, I think there's also some thought when we talk about multiple devices, there are also potentially multiple clouds. Do you have any feedback on that?
Absolutely. So stepping back to our BAA for a moment, oftentimes, if I remember this story and other stories correctly, oftentimes these organizations don't just think about one public cloud. They want to think about, how do I consume this and offer it across multiple clouds, or how do I have kind of that same level of service from an availability perspective, from a feature perspective across multiple cloud vendors, because you're probably serving up different types of devices, which, by the way, may be running different operating systems or different technologies on the front end. And so one of the neat things about this story and ClearData in general is what you see there on the kind of the customized BAA based off of the public cloud. Imagine being able to have a single comprehensive BAA across multiple cloud platforms so that you could use a Microsoft Azure or an Amazon Web Services or a Google Cloud platform and do it kind of all under that same protection from a security, compliance, and privacy perspective. And so that's been, I think, one of the really exciting things about how to help drive innovation and adoption here, because the truth is, at least from my perspective, not all of the public clouds are born equal, and in many cases, a lot of life sciences organizations out there agree. So that's what I'm seeing in the market. Scott, back to you.
Good. Well, let's talk about the next example, and this one is about post-acute discharge. So a medical device has been implanted in the patient, and there's pressure from a value-based care movement that we talked about early on to demonstrate that this device is worth the expense, the invasive surgery for the patient, the expense of the device itself, and let's see that the outcomes are truly better. So in this case, the organization actually surrounded the patient and took telemetry from the device and scales and wearables and multiple other sources of information, pulled that into a big data environment, and then was able to have nurse case managers monitor these patients. And then, for instance, if they needed just to back off the salt, they would do that, or if they needed to come into the physician clinic and have their medication adjusted, the nurse could give them that advice. Or if there were some acute incident that needed to be taken right away, the nurse could tell the patient they needed to get that taken care of, and all in the spirit of trying to have the patient have the best clinical outcome, and to reduce additional expense, the expense of unnecessary hospital readmit, for instance. So great solution, but some big challenges given the IoT elements and the rollout within the European Union and the need to care for PII in a way that's very different from the United States and to comply with GDPR. So in fact, Matt, one of the dashboards that you mentioned actually displays GDPR compliance, which is really a great benefit. Matt, what have you seen in terms of big data and cloud tools and APIs to address some of those challenges?
Sure. So where I try to focus here is how do we leverage the public cloud capabilities as natively as possible so that organizations that are focusing on kind of this, this case management example don't have to go learn a shim, or they don't have to go learn a third-party API or any kind of functionality outside of the public cloud. It's hard enough that they need to go learn the public cloud technology itself. And so as it rapidly grows and scales, it becomes very important that these organizations can use those native tools, or even those native consoles, in the case of the public cloud, using a native console, and rely on somebody like ClearData to secure and consistently keep the environment compliant kind of from the outside in view. And that's become essential. On the big data side, it's really interesting. In this example, we have a Hadoop environment, and Scott, a lot of these public clouds now have built their own, similar. So the Hadoop organizations that you would know, like the Hortonworks out there, have excellent offerings, and life science organizations are using those or similar offerings because now they have, just like kind of that native API speech that I just kind of gave, they now have marketplace integrations and native integrations, so you can download a compliance image, if you will, and deploy that environment within your life sciences organization. And of course, the public clouds, as I said, have also developed some of their own big data, not only database tooling, but big data analytics tooling so that you can run on top to try to drive results. And so that's what I have seen in that example. And I know we brought up clinical trials earlier, so I wanted to make sure that we got to that one. So Scott, do you want to kind of walk us through that use case?
Yeah, absolutely. So, clinical trials, we often think about the pharmaceutical organization and a CRO and others, but of course there's so many players that are involved. And in one case, we actually work with one of the nation's largest provider organization, huge multi-hospital, multi-state organization, who wanted to improve their IRB process and of course many complex policies and different stakeholders and even different legacy processes between the various hospitals that are part of this very large network, and we're able to develop a common standardized system, which of course meets the federal regulations, but also fits within the workflows of the individual hospitals and provides them throughout this with all of the compliance, the privacy and the security, the uptime and the agility, and actually cost effectiveness that they need. This one's also exciting. It's a project that we have been supporting for approaching 10 years now. So there's, we talk about agility and moving quick, and some of these things that are successful can really last a long time and can grow. So that's been a great part of making a difference in helping validate new therapies and get them to market and get them into treatment for patients. And I'll turn it back over to you as you think about these broader issues related to GXP.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I didn't know that it was 10 years. So that really is an amazing feat. I think about some of the GXP implications here, and of course everybody knows, GXP, good practice, right? And it varies based off of the field you're in, whether it be, things like pharmaceutical or manufacturing. And Scott actually just said the word validation. And, when I think about implications, I think as it relates to public cloud, I think all about how do you prove validation, right? And the thing around GXP assessment, right? Kind of that stage where you're validating whether the system has any kind of GXP impact, and you're doing things like monitoring and supervising. And the whole concept is that you are being able to show product quality and safety and identity and efficacy. And so ClearData has had the opportunity of building out dashboard capability to actually show things, like patch levels and consistency and how it is monitored throughout the entire process of the clinical trial. And so really excited to kind of knock down that wall and show what they call as a computer system validation process for those of you who are very familiar with GXP. And so, with that, Scott, back over to you.
Yeah, so, I reflect back on what we talked about today, Matt, and it's, good to think about the big challenges that we have within healthcare and specifically in life sciences, big industry challenges. Although we have some great tools like the cloud to help us address those challenges, however, with those tools comes some new challenges of their own, and specifically challenges related to privacy, security, and compliance, and finding the talent and the expertise to deal with all that. And it was good to hear about the automation, the tools, the evidence on the dashboard that can help organizations get through those challenges. And it's also good to see some specific examples of some customers making a difference with patients and providers in this portion of the industry, and able to overcome, whether that be GDPR or HIPAA or GXP, deal with those challenges and take advantage of the power of the public cloud. So it's good talking with you, Matt. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. I will start with that as I close. This has gotten my passion to talk to folks like yourselves out there, and so I would encourage everyone to come check out our case studies, our white papers, videos, articles, blog posts at ClearData.com. And you can, of course, connect with us on LinkedIn. We are always excited to talk about challenges that you're seeing in the security, privacy, and compliance space, because as it says on that slide there, you really can rise to the challenge of leveraging some of these benefits out there while also rising to the challenge of remaining compliant as it relates to things like HIPAA and GDPR. So with that, let's keep the conversation going, and thank you, everyone.